wabarakatuh. In today's class, we're going to talk about archetypal criticism. Archetypal criticism. The beginnings of archetypal studies started with anthropology. The most significant work that founded this type of criticism is The Golden Bough, written by Sir James Frazer. It is a comparative study of the primitive origins of religion in magic, ritual, and myth. So, the central motive in Frazer's work deals with the archetype of crucifixion and resurrection, specifically the myths describing the killing of the divine king. Among the primitive peoples, it was believed that the ruler was a divine or semi divine being whose life was identified with the life cycle of nature and in human existence. Because of this identification, the safety of the people and even the world was felt to depend upon the life of the god king. On the one hand, a vigorous, healthy ruler would ensure natural and human productivity. On the other hand, a sick and maimed king would bring blight and disease to the land and its people. Fraser points out that if the course of nature is dependent on the man's god's life, what catastrophes might not be expected from the gradual enfeeblement of his powers and the final extinction in death? There is only one way of averting these dangers. The man god must be killed as soon as he shows symptoms that his powers are beginning to fail, and his soul must be transferred to a vigorous successor before it has been seriously impaired by threatened decay. Fraser, page 265. Among some people, the kings were put to death at regular intervals to ensure the welfare of the people or the tribe. Later, however, substitute figures were killed in place of the kings themselves, and the sacrifices became purely symbolic rather than literal. This is why, in some movies, I think on um, some movies like the Caribbean pirates, we can see the figure of the king being put to death. So it takes after this practice of killing kings as a form of sacrifice. Archetypes and the collective unconscious. Archetypal criticism later gets its impetus from psychologist Carl Jung, who postulated that humankind has a collective unconscious, a kind of universal psyche which is manifested in dreams and myths and which harbors themes and images that we all inherit. Literature, therefore, imitates not the world but rather the total dream of humankind. So, from literary works, we have images, and these images are written into the literary works by writers who share a similar or similar sets of symbols that all cultures share. And this is the idea that archetypal criticism brings to or contributes to literary criticism. To Jung, an archetype in the collective unconscious cannot be representable but has effects which make visualizations of it possible, namely the archetypal images and ideas, due to the fact they are at an inaccessible part of the mind. The archetypes to which Jung refers are represented through primordial images, a term he coined. Primordial images originate from the initial stages of humanity and have been part of the collective unconscious ever since. It is through primordial images that universal archetypes are experienced, and more importantly, that the unconscious is revealed. Archetypal criticism. It was not until the work of the Canadian literary critic Northrop Frye that archetypal criticism was theorized in purely literary terms. In Frye's Anatomy of Criticism, which came about or originated from the archetypes of literature, his essay, Frye helped displace new criticism as a major mode of analyzing literary texts before giving way to structuralism. According to Frye, similar motifs or themes may be found in many different mythologies, and certain images that recur in the midst of many people who live widely separated in time and space tend to have common meanings, or more accurately, and to elicit comparable psychological responses and to serve similar functions. These are called archetypes or universal symbols. Archetypal criticism argues that archetypes determine the form and function of literary works, that a text's meaning is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. Archetypes are the unknowable basic forms personified or concretized in recurring images, symbols, or patterns such as images, colors, symbols, and motifs. An example of a set of images that are related to nature are the following. Water. Water, whenever it reoccurs in works of literature, represents the mystery of creation, birth, death, resurrection. The sea represents the mother of all life, spiritual mystery and infinity, death and rebirth. River represents the flowing of time into eternity, transitional phases of life cycle. Sun represents creative energy, law in nature, consciousness, passages of time and life. The rising sun represents birth, creation, and enlightenment. The setting sun represents death. Colors. Red represents blood, sacrifice, violent passion, and disorder. Green might represent growth, sensation, hope, and fertility. Blue represents usually highly positive, truth, religious feelings, and spiritual purity. Black represents chaos, mystery, and the unknown. White represents something that highly multivalent, light, purity, um, innocence, timelessness, and its negative aspects such as death, terror, and the supernatural, as well as the blinding of truth of an inscrutable cosmic mystery. The colors could be represented in slide like this one, where examples are shown. Okay, for example, in this picture of a Hindu goddess, or I think it's Hindu god, not rather than a goddess, it's a Hindu god. The color green is used to, as you can see from the previous slide, it represents growth, sensation, hope, and fertility. So this is related to this god here. So the circle or sphere, okay, which is a shape, also represents certain things. An oval shape, for example, the mystery of life and the process of generation. This is what it represents. Yang and yin represents a Chinese symbol representing a union of the opposite forces of the yang, masculine principle, light activity in the conscious mind, and yin, the female principle, darkness, passivity, and the unconscious mind. Ouroboros, which is the ancient symbol of a snake biting its own tail, signifies the eternal cycle of life, primordial unconsciousness, and the unity of opposing forces. Numbers, for example, can also represent things. Three, for example, represents spiritual awareness and unity, the Trinity, the male principle. Number four represents is associated with circles, life cycle, four seasons, female principle, earth nature, four elements such as earth, fire, air, and water. Number five signifies integration, the four limbs and the head of that controls them. Number seven, the most potent of all symbolic numbers, signifying the union of three and four. The archetypal mother. This is the symbol of a figure, a persona. The good mother. Positive represents positive aspects of the earth mother, associated with life, principle, death, birth and nourishment, not death, birth, warmth and nourishment. The terrible mother, including the negative aspects of the earth mother. The wish represents the wish, the sorceress, the siren, whore, lamia, femme fatale, which is associated with sensuality, sexual orgies. The soulmate, the Sophia figure, is the mother, the princess or beautiful lady, incarnation or of inspiration and spiritual fulfillment, such as in Jung's Anima. Now, another figure is the wise old man, who represents the savior, redeemer, and guru. Personification of the spiritual principle representing knowledge, reflection, insight, wisdom, cleverness, and intuition on the one hand, and on the other hand, moral qualities and readiness to help, which makes his spiritual character sufficiently plain. He also tests the moral qualities of others and makes gifts dependent on the test. The old man always appears when the hero is in a hopeless and desperate situation from which only a profound reflection or a lucky idea can extricate him. But since for internal or external reasons the hero cannot accomplish this himself, the knowledge needs to compensate the deficiencies come which comes in the form of personified thought, for example, the sagacious old man. The trickster, joker, clown, fool, poltergeist, confidence man, or con man, appears opposite of the old man. He does, however, have a positive side and may serve a healing function through his transformative influence. Jean Rosier Smith points out that myths, as they appear in literature, can be read as part of an effort for human and cultural survival. The trickster role as survival and transformer, creating order from chaos, accounts for the figure's universal appeal and its centrality to mythology and folklore of so many cultures. While the trickster archetype has appeared in many cultures, it is particularly notable in African American and American Indian cultures. For Malay folklore, we have Kancil and Bujung Pak Belalang. Archetype motifs and patterns. We have three here. The first is the creation archetypes, which is the most fundamental account of human existence brought about by supernatural beings or being, and it shows religion as being a myth. The quest is another archetype where the hero, savior, deliverer, undertakes some long journey during which he or she must perform impossible tasks, battle with monsters, solve unanswerable riddles, and overcome insurmountable obstacles in order to save the kingdom. Initiation. The hero undergoes a series of excruciating ordeals in passing from ignorance and immaturity to social and spiritual adulthood, that is, achieving maturity and becoming fully fledged member of his or her social group. The initiation must commonly consist of first separation, second transformation, and third return. A variation it is a variation of death rebirth archetypes. The sacrificial goat, the hero, with whom the welfare of the tribe or nation is identified, must die to atone for the people's sin and restore the land to fruitfulness. This is another archetype. Corollary to the rite of sacrifice was the scapegoat archetype. This motive centered on the belief that by transferring the corruptions of the tribe to a sacred animal or person, then by a killing, and in some instances killing the scapegoat, the tribe could achieve the cleansing and atonement thought necessary for natural and spiritual rebirth. Jung Jungian psychology and its archetypal insights. Jung, in the archetypes and the collective unconscious, added a concept and three more archetypes to this listed above. The concept is the first, which is in the individuation. And in this individuation, we have three types of archetypes: the shadow, the anima, and the persona. So individuation is related to those archetypes designated as the shadow, the persona, and the anima. These are forms inside archetypes inside individuation. Individuation is a psychological growing up, the process of discovering those aspects of one's life that make one an individual different from other members of the species. It is essentially a process of recognition that is, as one matures, the individual must consciously recognize the various aspects, unfavorable and favorable, of oneself. So, if one fails to recognize this various aspects of oneself, fails to recognize that one has a positive side and negative side, one will become neurotic. Okay, neurotic individuals will project this neurosis to some other person or objective. These projections can be divided into three: the shadow, the persona, and the anima. The shadow in melodrama, such as television or film, whether Western or cop story, the persona, the anima, and the shadow are projected in the hero, heroine, and the villain. The shadow is the darker aspect of our unconscious self, the inferior and less pleasing aspects of the personality which we wish to suppress. For example, the devil. Jung gives the anima feminine designation in the male psyche, pointing out anima images is usually projected around women. In the female psyche, this archetype is called animus. In this sense, the anima is a contrasexual part of the man's psyche, an image of the opposite sex that he carries in both his personal and collective unconscious. The human psyche is bisexual, though the psychological characteristics of the opposite sex in each of us are generally unconscious, revealing themselves only in dreams or in projections on someone in our environment. In literature, projections of anima are in Helen of Troy, Milton's Eve, and so on. The anima is a kind of mediator between the ego, the conscious will or thinking self, and the unconscious will of the male individual. The persona, it is the opposite of the anima as it mediates between our ego and the external world. Speaking metaphorically, the ego is a coin. The image of one side is the anima and the other side the persona. The persona is the actor's mask that we show to the world that it is our social personality, a personality that is sometimes quite different from our true self. Jung, in discussing social masks, and explains that he explains that in order to achieve psychological maturity, the individual must have a flexible, viable persona that can be brought into harmonious relationship with other components of his or her psychic makeup. Now, the references used are this. Okay, thank you. That's the end of our video show today. Thank you.